I think you look like you're very ready for the afternoon. Yes? Yes, good. Yeah. So this afternoon we continue our conversation. We will have a conversation, and we're presenting Colette Mazzucelli, who is an alum of this university. Yes, and she started her higher education here as a magna cum laude graduate of the University of Scranton, who studied philosophy and history, law and diplomacy at the Fletcher School at Tufts following that, and international educational development at Columbia's Teachers College, and earned her doctoral degree in comparative politics, international relations, and political philosophy from Georgetown University. Now imagine all those things. And you'll find her quite an original, creative thinker. She's a professor at NYU and is a leading expert in global education for people in the kind of inauspicious circumstances that are regrettably very much with us today. Colette's vision of education knows no boundaries. While you might not consider her a techie, she is a pioneer in using technology to educate people in camps and in areas that we consider no man's land, to the rights and responsibilities of citizenship. I had the privilege of speaking to her class at NYU on ethnic conflict this past summer, and am awed by her creative capacities as a teacher. Please welcome Colette Mazzucelli to the podium.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
It's truly a joy to return to the university and to walk these grounds and to see how much has changed here. How much has changed and how much has remained quite the same in the dedication of faculty, in the spirit of community, and in the vision of the leadership to make this, for the student, an active and engaged and integrated and now a global experience. And in that light, I'd like to speak to you a little bit today about my own work. Let's pull something up before we start with, all right, before we start with this, let's pull something else up. That's technology for you. You have to go with the flow. Okay. Okay. We have here a series of quotes from A. Bartlett Giamatti, former president of Yale University, and there's one quote in particular that I would like to draw your attention to because I think it infuses the spirit of what I'm about to present to you today. Every classroom is an act of making citizens in the realm of that room, and every room is a figure for the larger community. Now, this is coming from his volume of Free and Ordered Space, The University in the Real World, which was actually a collection of his speeches in which he discussed the significance of the university, the changes taking place in the university as we think about our society. Bearing that quote in mind, I'd like to take you now to the PowerPoint to start from here. Wright spaces, citizenship learning in liquid times. Wright, of course, referring to Frank Lloyd Wright, America's foremost architect, a writer and educator, a bold and visionary thinker. It takes a great deal of attention and care to nurture someone, to think about what learning means in our world today. And I've been nurtured throughout my life by a number of people, one of whom is here in the audience today, my high school history teacher, Sister Rosemary Sullivan. And it's with, yes, no, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's with a deep sense of appreciation and a great affection that I acknowledge her presence here today. My appreciation is likewise extended to Sandra Myers, to Robert Zelno here at the university, as well as to a number of colleagues at different institutions that I've had the privilege to teach at. Dean Vera Jelinek, Divisional Dean at New York University, Ted Bongiovanni, Director of NYU's Distance Learning, and then Elizabeth Liz Chiabachi, who introduced me to the Dean at Long Island University Global, who would allow me to innovate and allow me to create the course I'm going to talk about this afternoon. Two other colleagues who were also very dear to me and have been extremely instrumental in the development of my thinking are Matthew Jaskell and Andrew Townsing, who are the founders of Pioneer Academics Global Research Program, a very unique research mentoring program for very young, talented high school students throughout Asia and in other parts of the world. So that being said, let's begin, please, with a quote, again from Pope Francis, from our Holy Father. A political society, when it seeks, as a vocation, to satisfy common needs by stimulating the growth of all its members, especially those in situations of greater vulnerability or risk. Legislative activities is always based on care for the people. To this you have been invited, called, and convened by those who elected you. Indeed, when we think about learning in our world today, for our world today, we think about this calling. We think about the way in which we can serve through learning those who are marginalized, those who ask for social justice, those who are underserved. On the occasion of His Holy Father's visit to the United States, it is not only a joy to return here, it is a responsibility to participate in university for a day in the Ignatian spirit, in the spirit to love and serve in all things. To love and serve in all things is the responsibility that my education here continues to inspire 30 years after my graduation. This responsibility, I believe, is at the core of the engaged, integrated, and global student experience articulated by President Quinn in the University of Scranton Plan as we look ahead to 2020. In 1984-85, a Swiss university's grant allowed me to journey from Scranton to Fribourg to study at the only bilingual university, French-German university in that country. Since that eventful year, different experiences in countries around the world have suggested to me the need to establish in education freedom from exclusion as a human right. And indeed, this was something that I was asked to present at the United Nations, and it's something I'd like to develop here in our conversation today. Right spaces are those in lifelong learning in which we must strive to affirm the civil in society, touching the lives of those around us, both near and far. In these spaces, there is freedom from exclusion, anchored as a human right, because unlearning intolerance means we make a place for the marginalized. The voices repressive states aim to silence. Voices that are heard in a civil society dialogue in which leaders are held accountable to citizens. Now, when I arrived on campus in 1979, and I took my campus tour, I was in the middle of Linden Street. There was no Commons. So essentially, my remarks also chronicle the journey in more recent years that this university has taken, a physical journey and a journey of community. Here you see simply the image of Linden Street. My freshman experience was an experience of life in what's called the Upper Quad, specifically in Lynette Hall. And in the Upper Quad, as you see, there's a space there which makes place for us to learn together in community. And in fact, Lynette Quad was my first experience of learning in community with my fellow students. Learning in the Quad became a community experience. And then we had the Commons, which was dedicated in my year here. The experience of plurality in community and creating that commons, in creating that place to unify different sections of the campus, we were further laying the groundwork for the community that Scranton aspired to be. When I think of citizenship learning in what I'll discuss as liquid times, I think of transforming a space or spaces by making a place for community learning. And in that respect, what we were experiencing in the upper quad, what we were learning together, was a way of also expanding the commons. We made places in different parts of the campus for our learning to flourish, for ideas to be shared, for our knowledge to expand. And then, from the quad, we had the classroom experience. And here you see two images of very different experiences. The image that you see of a colleague of mine staring out from what was then Loyola Hall of Science onto Alumni Memorial Library at the time is a somewhat solitary experience. And that, for the most part, was my experience in the classroom in the 1980s, in the sense that there weren't places made in classrooms at that time for what we would call small group learning. It was much more the traditional rows front to back learning, and it didn't allow for a lot of team congregation or group work or the type of synergies that I think you see the place on the left or on the right, depending on how you're looking at it, allowing. This, of course, is a classroom in the new Loyola Hall of Science. And the difference is quite profound when you think about the experience, the pedagogical experience, the learning experience that's being offered to students today. And here in the architecture, we see first that St. Thomas Hall and the new Hall of Science architecturally come together to suggest that the humanities, the sciences, the different disciplines are connecting. And as those different disciplines connect, we also see in the student experience connections in the classroom and connections beyond the classroom, thinking about what is happening inside the institution and how what is happening inside the institution is also reflected in the society and indeed in the larger world. So there are connections being made in many different ways. The classroom with a window to the world is indeed still a classroom as we would conceive of it in the traditional sense, and yet that classroom is also changing. The final piece of the, shall we say, experience for me, after arriving here, seeing Linden Street, experiencing the upper quad, being a part of the Commons, having a classroom experience, was the journey which is part of the Fulbright story. And indeed, Senator Fulbright spoke at my graduation ceremony. And I remember in particular his remarks, because those remarks talked about the legacy that the Fulbright experience would leave for each of us who participated in it, and the ways in which that Fulbright experience would transform this institution. And indeed, his remarks have borne true. His legacy continues, and the Fulbright story endures. There he is speaking in 1983. And as you can see, at that time, Senator Fulbright really didn't attend many graduation ceremonies. He came back to Scranton specifically because of the dedication of the faculty here and of the administration here to help students to obtain Fulbrights so they could extend their university experiences. Engaged, integrated, and global, the student-centered experience. The legacy of Senator Fulbright's remarks, in my mind, highlight that we are not separate from our environment. This week we listen to the message of Pope Francis as lifelong learners, reflecting on the idea that what we do for the environment, we do as citizens, who listen to the voices of the underserved, the marginalized, in our world today. Pope Francis speaks on behalf of the poor, the underprivileged, with a call for action in social justice, on behalf of humanity, in what the visionary public servant John Burton termed world society. Burton was a former diplomat, an Australian diplomat, who turned to learning, higher learning, and who pioneered ideas in the field of conflict resolution. As educators, we have a vocation in this era to integrate citizenship learning linked directly to local experiences for our students in service around the globe, in creatively designed, in innovative courses across the university curriculum. In citizenship learning, we inquire about the kind of world we will leave to future generations. Pope Francis asks us to respect one another, to embody in our service the dedication to a human family that lives in harmony in a spirit of social justice. His message is one to citizens of the world. It is an interfaith message, underlining pluralism. The Holy Father rejects the throwaway culture with a focus on the decline in the quality of human life and the breakdown of society, of course, in the papal encyclical. Pope Francis cites the dangers of this culture in connection with immigration, saying, "A change of attitudes towards migrants and refugees is needed on the part of everyone, moving away from attitudes of defensiveness and fear, indifference and marginalization, all typical of a throwaway culture, towards attitudes based on a culture of encounter, the only culture capable of building a better, more just, and fraternal world." In this context, the Pope urges us to reflect on the moral imperative to act on climate change. The papal encyclical is making leaders rethink their actions in this critical policy area. Indeed, China and the United States are countries whose leaders act within their state boundaries, yet with the need to cooperate in the global interest on climate change. In citizenship learning, likewise, there is a responsibility to assess the impact of climate change on forced migration, to reflect on the refugee exodus in terms of changing climate conditions. These conditions urge consideration as well of global public health concerns. Pandemics, like the forced exodus of climate change refugees, know no borders in our world today. In my undergraduate learning on the Scranton campus, the experience was one of making space for the expansion of place-making, learning together in community. From Linden Street to the Upper Quad, to the University Commons, to the science classroom, to a journey abroad, connections were established in the exchanges of ideas, in the exchanges of students, that is our university's Fulbright story and legacy. In thinking about the essence of a potential citizenship learning space, we may return to what Frank Lloyd Wright considered the true building block of social transformation, the family home. Wright spaces articulate democratic principles in which diversity and pluralism figure prominently. As he wrote in 1908, there should be as many kinds, styles of houses as kinds, styles of people, and as many differentiations as there are different individuals. In Wright spaces, interior walls are minimized to emphasize openness and community, like in the Prairie House design. The essentials of architecture open spaces that could be genuinely transformative. Instead of a separate thing set up independently of landscape and site, the building with landscape and site became inevitably one. And here you see an example of that prairie style, just to give you concretely a sense of what Wright in his imagination and in his architecture was aspiring to achieve. Organic architecture, again, that ability, that fluidity, so that landscape end, building R1, without any obstacles, without any breaks. Each week, during this fall semester, my experience teaching international relations to an LIU Global undergraduate class engages 9 students across 6 continents in real time, synchronously, via Zoom video conference interactions. The pedagogy relies on recollections of my time as a student here at this university. These memories inform my ideas to experiment opening spaces in which academic concepts intersect with field experiences for each of the LIU Global candidates, regardless of where he or she is in the world. Students in locales around the globe meet in a technology-mediated classroom without borders to animate a dialogue that nurtures citizenship learning. Wright's search for an organic architecture comes to mind in the citizenship learning that is possible, whereby structure would stand as a unified whole, growing from and being a blessing to the landscape. The diverse environments in which LIU Global undergraduates are placed around the world contribute to this plural dialogue. Students question concepts in the academic literature on the basis of their direct local experiences, thereby igniting their intellectual curiosity and anchoring their search for knowledge. For Wright, a truly organic building developed from within outwards and was thus in harmony with its time, its place, and its inhabitants. Wright spaces are imbued with the architect's regard for nature, inspired by the writings of transcendentalists, Emerson, Whitman, Thoreau. It is significant that the spaces Wright conceived were guided by nature in both material and form. Likewise, translocal spaces, which nurture citizenship learning to focus on identity, diversity, social justice, as a complement to placemaking, require an organic character in relation to landscape. These translocal spaces, Wright spaces, must adapt by pushing the boundaries of experience to maintain their autonomy. This autonomy is essential as we confront what the sociologist Zygmunt Bauman has termed liquid times. Bauman argues that there are a number of negative consequences of globalization, such as the generation of surplus people who have nowhere to go in a world that is full. There are increasingly visible inequalities as the rich and the poor come to live closer together, one dimension of our increasing interdependence as globalization intensifies. This is a world in which it is increasingly difficult for communities and nations to provide collective security. Now, Pope Francis in St. Peter's Square this year asked, may every parish, every religious community, every monastery, every sanctuary in Europe host a family. In response to the Pope's call, we know there are approximately 120,000 parishes across Europe. Yet the Syrian refugee crisis is a call as well to Europe's societies to respond in ways that are civil rather than exclusionary. And we see the extent to which this call is divisive among the Europeans themselves. We see the extent to which Europe, whose integration on the continent after the Second World War was a project for peace, we see the extent to which that unity is now fragmenting, the civility in society is narrowing, the spaces we have to experience that civility are constrained. That is a call to learning. That is a call to unlearning intolerance. That is a call to reflection on the ways in which society today may respond to the forced migration, to the refugee influx that is so inherent in our global experience. Liquid times for immigrants, according to Bauman, provide a great opportunity for minorities to challenge elements of the culture of the dominant group. Since everything is in flux and all becomes negotiable, they have an ever bigger opportunity to state their values in opposition to the dominant values. Well, this suggests contestation. This suggests the need for dialogue. This suggests the need for inclusiveness. Pluralism in a spirit of inclusivity. The message that I believe our Holy Father was delivering at the United Nations this week. Bauman asserts that the ultimate cause of negative globalization is due to the fact that the owners of capital are invisible and shifting, having the power to invest locally without making commitments, and even to ignore international law if they deem it in their interests. The elite are globally mobile. They are not stuck in one place, and they are free to move on if there are better investment opportunities elsewhere. The elite are seen as creating an unstable world as they move from place to place, seeking to maximize their profits. The experience of negative globalization for the rest who are doomed to be local is one of increasing anxiety, fear, and suspicion, which derive from living in an unstable and unpredictable world over which we have no control. We are compelled to develop strategies to counter the unstable, unjust, unequal, and risky and dangerous world that the forever shifting elite leave in their wake. These are only some of the challenges educators confront in the design of what may be termed Wright spaces to nurture citizenship learning in liquid times. Now, I want to take you through some of the ways in which these spaces are nurtured in the specific experience that I'm creating this fall term for LIU Global. The first aspect, the first dimension, is a real-time dimension. And in Wright's words, an idea is salvation by imagination. So what do we imagine? Well, we imagine a technology-mediated dialogue that privileges the local space. So if you can imagine, I have 8 students. 2 are in China, 1 is in Cambodia, 1 is in Australia, 2 are in Spain, 1 is in Costa Rica, another in Utah. So they're spread all around the globe. In real time, we meet once each week to have a dialogue about the specific topic we are covering in international relations. It might be a topic related to the refugee crisis, a topic related to climate change and its impact on forced migration. It can be any number of topics. What these students are asked to do is to engage with the literature from their local place. They're asked to read the chapter, and they're asked to assess it on the basis of their experience in the part of the world where they are interning, in the part of the world where they are in field learning assignments. And then they're asked to bring to the classroom without borders, to this video classroom, their experience as we discuss the literature, as we ask questions critically. Please.
These are interns, not...
No, these are undergraduates.
But they're not living in that particular country.
They are assigned...
Somebody going out from wherever to these locations.
In other words, they are assigned as LIU Global undergraduates to undertake a 4-year program of study in which each year they are placed on a different continent.
Oh my.
No, this is a unique undergraduate program. It's the only undergraduate program of its kind in the world. So they will start in Costa Rica in the freshman year, and they will live in Costa Rica in the freshman year. They are assigned host families, they are assigned a curriculum of study, and they are assigned a field internship. LIU Global started out 50 years ago, celebrated its 50th anniversary this year, as a Quaker initiative. And the idea of the Quakers was grounded in experiential learning. At that time, the small cohort that began in the program undertook service learning around the globe in many different places. As the curriculum developed, Long Island University decided that it would integrate the entire program into its university curriculum as a global program. Hence, it became LIU Global. But the idea that you would have 4 years, where the first year would be in Costa Rica, the second year would be in Europe, the third year would be in China or Australia, and the fourth year would be back at LIU Brooklyn, doing an internship and writing a thesis reflecting on the previous 3 years. That developed, that evolved. So if you like, the idea behind it is that these LIU Global candidates should have an education that is an education for a world society, an education where they're bringing back with them all of the local experiences that they have acquired over the undergraduate course of study.
What are they doing when they're not in the classroom?
A variety of things. In other words, LIU Global, in my experience, is unique also because they are allowed to identify internships where they are based. So in other words, if one of my, for example, thesis candidates is based in India now, she's very interested in learning more about service learning as it's experienced there. She's very interested in interning in an ashram. She's very interested in learning from local people there about the way of life, about meditation, about the different ways in which her academic learning can be complemented by the field learning in that particular country. So she defines, in cooperation with the internship advisor, the field experience that is tailored to her needs. And then the academic program and the field experience interrelate with each other. And out of that, she then can develop a thesis project which would reflect the sum totality of her experiences going through the 4 years.
How are they chosen?
They apply, and it is a national...
They apply from high school?
Yeah, and so in other words, the admissions of Long Island University, and specifically of LIU Global, will tour the country, will tour the United States. They have admissions officers who are responsible to go around to many of the high schools in different states and to present the program. And that is why LIU Global does have a national and one would say also an international student body, because they are really recruiting from the entire country. This is something that the dean now, Dean Jeff Belknap, has insisted upon, because again, he wants the diversity of the United States to be reflected in the program. It is reflected in the program. And he wants those students who have the intellectual curiosity to want to engage in this type of coursework and experiential learning to have the opportunity to know about it from him firsthand. So the dean will travel himself. In other words, he doesn't only leave it to admissions officers. Likewise, those of us on faculty, sometimes we are asked to make presentations to talk about, for example, a specific course that we might want to be innovating in. In this way, there is a very, very fluid, a very, very holistic type of admissions process. And the students have a much clearer sense of exactly what it is they will be embarking upon, because it isn't a usual type of program. You have to be a rather special student to be willing to change each year, to adapt to local environments, and to have the curiosity to want to learn in spaces that are not traditional. And these students have that.
How many are in this year's freshman class?
I believe the intake for this year's freshman class was about 300.
So 300 freshman year go down to Costa Rica?
Most of them are placed. Now, I'm not exactly sure how they divide who is assigned where, because I know that Costa Rica is the anchor of the program. And within that anchor, we have, for example, opportunities to cooperate with faculty at the United Nations University down in Costa Rica. So there are local faculty, there are UN university faculty, there are different ways that we grow the faculty locally. And then, of course, we have our team at LIU Brooklyn, and then we have the directors who are responsible for the Europe year, for the Australia year. There's also a comparative religion program that allows students to travel. I believe it is Bali, India, and Thailand. Yeah.
What does this cost them?
It's the average tuition that you would expect from Long Island University. No, it is
Like $50,000 a year or something?
roughly, yes.
Plus room and board?
And that's arranged as part of the tuition. So in other words, everything is factored in up front, but they are paying tuition to Long Island University. And that keeps the process, in a sense, seamless, because you can imagine what would happen if each year they would have to change what they did. Please.
What about the overall cost? I can understand the tuition part, but what about the overall cost of participating in the program?
The overall costs are offset in part by the fact that LIU Global over the past 50 years has developed quite an extensive infrastructure in terms of where these students can stay and how they're housed and the cooperation for the field learning experiences. So within that tuition for the $60,000 that LIU would charge is factored in what the experiences are. Airfare and the like, I think that's also calculated, and the student is presented with a type of budget, if you like. And then it's up to the student to negotiate with his or her advisor as to how best to pursue the program in the way that is tailored to that student's particular interests and needs. But it's intricate, because you can imagine each student has a different program, in a sense, because the field learning experiences are unique to the students. The courses that are offered, those are part of the curriculum. And it's the balance, maintaining the balance, that's important. Other questions? I want to take questions because that's important.
Thank you for answering that.
Please.
Do they attend a university in that country?
Yes, so in other words, some of them will attend the lectures at the United Nations University in Costa Rica. In other parts of the world, for example, in January, I will do an intensive course 1 week in Paris and 1 week in Rome. And they will be studying on site with me in those cities. And we create the courses in conjunction with local colleagues and with the resources that are existing locally. So in that sense, the experiences are meant to be very much part of what a student would have as a local student in that environment. And that's something which I think the faculty, particularly, have worked very hard at, because they go to the countries, they investigate the opportunities that are available there for the students, and they work very closely with each student to plan the student's curriculum. Likewise on thesis advisement. My thesis advisees are spread over the world. This semester I have 3. The one in India, for example, I work with every week via video conference closely. And as she explains to me what she's experiencing in India, we integrate literature that can help her. She takes literature from the field, and then I suggest literature to her from here. So it's very much a negotiation. It's a back and forth. So that what the student experiences is very centered on active learning and on that student's personal and eventually professional development. Yeah?
The language is always English?
Yes, although it's English in the courses. Okay, that's the lingua franca for obvious reasons. That being said, the internship experiences, if it's in Costa Rica, it is likely that it's in Spanish because the faculty there are all fluent Spanish speakers. If it's in Europe, at times the internship experiences will be French or Italian, and now increasingly also German, because we've established a site experience in Berlin as of this year. So English in the courses, but other languages in the field experiences. And that's particularly important if you think about this idea of the translocal space. I want the students in my particular class to bring in literature in different languages. I want them to speak to me in other languages. I want them to capture the flavor of where they are and translate that in the class I'm creating. So that class, again, accentuates diversity, underlines plurality, and gives them an opportunity to see and see again as they read the literature. I want them to be questioning constantly, not taking for granted, but questioning constantly what they're reading and applying it always to where they are. Does this literature make sense given the context I find myself in? Yeah.
And do they eventually congregate together at LIU for a year?
Yes, because you could describe the experience overall as a blended learning experience, meaning in the first year, they have opportunities to form bonds as a cohort at LIU Brooklyn. Then they go out to Costa Rica, so they're forming further bonds. Then they face a choice in the second year where they choose to go in Europe. Usually the majority of the cohort will go to Alcalá in Spain the first semester, and then they will go to Florence the second semester. Faculty such as myself will meet up with them in different cities, and they will congregate together in small groups. So for my Europe course, I might have a seminar of some 12 students. Other students will take a seminar elsewhere. So the bonds are very strong as they go through the 4 years, so that when they graduate, you might as well say it's something similar to a kind of diplomatic corps for undergraduate education. They come out of it with a very, very strong sense of community in the core, because not only have they met in LIU Brooklyn, not only have they had the chance to form bonds, they're forming bonds throughout their 4 years in different places around the world. So what they share is the uniqueness of the experience, traveling globally, living locally, and bringing in to the classroom that we're creating in this way more of that literature knowledge and field experience as the two come together. And the tighter the fit, the more we can push them in this type of a learning environment to really innovate in thinking about what they want to write about in a thesis. So we want to push them. There's no, shall we say, box. This is not thinking outside of the box. There is no box. The imagination is what drives them in the learning. As far as your imagination is going to take you, that's where your learning is going to go.
How about the preparation for graduate work?
Preparation for graduate work is different because I would say a number of these students are really interested in working in NGOs. They're interested from their field experiences then to translate that in some type of service. So immediately after graduation, I wouldn't say that the majority are thinking graduate work. Some are. But the majority are thinking, how can I now apply what it is I've learned? And how can I make a difference in society? I mean, these are young, very motivated, idealistic thinkers. And they're reflective. They're reflective on how the world is, and they're reflective on how they imagine the world could be. And the LIU Global Experience is right at that nexus. To have a realistic sense of the world you live in, but also to imagine the world that we may be evolving toward. And the education, the learning has to serve both. And that's the trick from the learning standpoint. You have to think about what is possible to create now in the learning. And then you have to look ahead and say, well, given the needs, given the challenges our society faces, what's the type of learning that we have to be thinking about? What's the type of vision that we have to have for the curriculum that can really be responsive in a proactive way? It's what Burton called provention, not prevention, provention. Provention, he coined the term. You want to understand the problems? Get at the underlying causes. Don't just look to prevent. Get underneath. Dig. Dig deeply. Get underneath. What are the causes of marginalization? Why are people underserved? What's the dynamic? What's happening? And then think about a learning that allows students to ask questions about what type of system we have and what type of challenges that system introduces. The learning should be responsive to society. It goes back to what Giamatti said, the quote at the beginning. Yeah?
How are these programs accredited?
They're accredited. I mean, LIU Global is an accredited program the way any university program would be accredited. I mean, it's part of the university. It's a discrete entity of the university. But the dean, when Dean Belknap came in, he went about thoroughly assessing the curriculum, assessing what needed to be revised. And he's gone about in the past 2 years in reshaping, in some ways, the curriculum in terms of how the overseas sites connect to the courses that we're now, as faculty, being asked to create. So it's a process. But the accreditation is there. They graduate with a degree from Long Island University. But it's reflective of the program that LIU Global offers.
Why is this program so unknown?
Very good question. That's a very good question. I think it's the question that Dean Belknap also asks. I think in part because when it was founded, it was not founded as a program by the Quakers in an academic setting. When Long Island University decided that they were going to adopt it, there was a whole series of steps that had to be taken in order to translate into the academic environment what this program could become. So as a result, that translation has only been taking place, I would say, over the past decade. And as a result, you have a legacy which is a legacy of 50 years of experiential learning with a much shorter legacy in terms of bringing in the academic element. That's what we're working on now. That being said, I think it's a program that responds to the needs of the time. And it's a program, certainly, that as a faculty member I appreciate because it allows me to innovate in a way that I just don't have opportunities to innovate in. You know, it's something that's unique. And it happens to be, timing is everything. It happens to be a question of when what you want to do meets the needs of a particular institution. Then you can innovate, again, as far as your imagination takes you. And as far as the students would like to go. I mean, we're very responsive on the faculty to the student needs. And I would say there's a lot of focus group work that's really done to ask the students, given your interest in forced migration, given your interest in climate change, given your interest in women's empowerment and education, where would you like to be and what type of course would you like to experience? And then we go about looking at the curriculum, assessing what's needed, filling in the gaps, and innovating. And that's the process that you see happening. And it happens each year. Because with each year, there's more innovations made. It's really assessed on a regular basis.
Are your admission requirements traditional SATs and college recommendations?
They are traditional admissions requirements, and then I think in the essay, what the dean and the admissions committee is looking to see is that type of intellectual curiosity to engage in this type of experience. So within the essay, you really get a sense of what the student's motivation is to want to participate.
And wouldn't these students have to be quite mature in order to handle something like this moving forward in different areas?
They have to be quite self-motivated. They have to be mature in the ability to integrate in different social settings. So there has to be an intercultural sensitivity. There also has to be a genuine commitment to going through the program over 4 years. Because you can imagine, it can become very difficult. I mean, I'll give you an example. The student who signed up for this course from Uganda, she was a student I wanted very much to keep in the course because I wanted that connection to a locality in Africa. And she encountered tremendous difficulties to stay on with us. And finally she wrote to me and she said, you know, Professor Mazzucelli, I've tried, but there are a lot of obstacles that I'm facing. And I said, I know you face the obstacles. But if you hang in there, I'll work with you. I'll make it possible to be in touch with you. Ultimately, she decided to put it on hold because she felt that what she could do in the field would take her away from her focus on the course. And she really wanted to maximize the field work that she was interested in doing with women locally in Uganda. So that's what she privileged. And I respect that. I mean, that's her choice. That takes a great deal of maturity first to make that choice, and to show the professor that she was thinking very clearly about the priorities that she had to set. So yes, there's definitely a need for commitment, maturity, and motivation.
What's the graduation rate?
I was at the graduation this past May. Now, that was my first graduation, so honestly, I couldn't give you an exact percentage. I couldn't give you a percentage because, again, it was my first time. But I counted, there had to be close to 100 people there who graduated. Now, I don't know what the earlier years took in, but it was a significant cohort. It was a significant cohort. And what they did was they each presented something from their experience. So it wasn't only a graduation ceremony, it was a celebration. They started, each of them, by coming in, and for their parents, which I thought was very touching, they said hello in the languages of the areas they had studied in. So you had hello in languages I had never heard. And I love languages. And I was delightfully surprised because there were many languages that I simply enjoyed hearing with that greeting. And the parents loved it. They absolutely loved it. It has to be a tremendous sense of pride, I think, for parents to see their students go through an experience like that and to know that they're loved by their children for giving their children the opportunity to have that type of an experience. So yeah, it was a lovely thing to see, actually, and to experience. Yeah.
One thing that you just said, the parents showing pride and everybody being happy all around. I'm familiar with that, but not in this context of this global undergraduate program. Mm-hmm. Our students go and are engaged in international service programs. Mm-hmm. So they go out, they experience, and they come back, and there is learning. The parents are obviously thrilled that their children have experienced something. Mm-hmm. The children learn to miss their parents. Or the checks. It's a wonderful thing. And I have, people here who might know me know that I'm all for globalization, internationalization. But on the other hand, you're putting out things. For example, you want them to integrate local literature. You want them to complement. Now, let me tell you, I can speak a few languages, mm-hmm. but it's very difficult for me to integrate literature from there. Mm-hmm. On one hand, you're saying you're thrilled that they're saying hello, good morning, good afternoon mm-hmm. at graduation in different languages, and that's wonderful. Mm-hmm. But for them to pick up a mm-hmm. language, and assuming that you're doing it for all 8 circuits, mm-hmm. I think it's either very optimistic mm-hmm. goal, or it is something which is stated and maybe glossed over. And in a sense also, I go back even further, you mentioned mm-hmm. India, and you said, well, they're interning in ashrams and mm-hmm. so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. If you look at what people are interning in India now, mm-hmm. if you go around and ask them, well, they're interning in Bollywood.
Fair enough.
Droves of people from Harvard, Stanford are going in there, and I see their faces as extras in the movies.
Now that's something. That's a different kind of experience. Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, when you write that off, I'm also not going to write that off. It's a business. It's something that's global. It's cultural. Mm-hmm. People laughed at Hollywood. People laughed at Bollywood. People laugh at other places. Nigeria has Nollywood. If you ever are in a bus traveling across Africa, you get exposed to that. Mm-hmm. Now, I won't go one side or the other. What I'm saying mm-hmm. is the goals you put forward are very ambitious. Mm-hmm. And from my perspective, with my limited experience, I don't know how much of this is doable. I'm sure it happens. I tried to look it up. Somebody asked the question, why is this not mm-hmm. widely known? Mm-hmm. Well, these days everything is available.
Of course.
Of course. And there is very little information, very little solid information on the LIU Global Program that I could access.
Well, you're also accessing a website that's in the process of being redesigned.
True, true.
So what you're accessing is what's available there.
I'm also, this is not just a university website. I'm looking at anything and everything. But my point is that how, you know, a real meat and potatoes assessment of how this is working. The cost factor is huge. I know, you know, dealing with our people, even with ISP trips, it's a huge factor to ensure, you know, that the people are safe. That my responsibility.
Right, but that's part of the responsibility when you undertake this type of a program. I mean, if you undertake this type of a program, you accept the responsibilities that are inherent in the program. And the students, likewise, accept the responsibilities.
And the cost of providing that is significant, unless you are somehow offsetting it. The cost of providing security, for example, if somebody, the home city, my home city of Calcutta, Kolkata now. I mean, I know how much it would cost for somebody from here to be in a reasonably safe environment, which would still maybe somebody would think it's not very reasonable.
Well,
but that would be pretty expensive. And I don't think that would be directly covered by tuition. So there is an additional cost to it. And then
well, the India program has raised the concerns that you mentioned, and in fact is being redesigned. So your point is valid.
Bali is fairly new.
Bali, I think, has been ongoing. I think it's been ongoing for a while, actually.
Bali, if you land at the airport, if you go left, you hit the haves. If you go right, you hit the have-nots, and it's dangerous.
But these students accept the challenge, if you like, and the responsibility that's inherent in it. The question, I think, in terms of coming back to what you said about the literature and the difficulties inherent in that, I don't think that that's a reason not to try to encourage them to be intellectually curious and to be ambitious enough to seek out different sources.
I agree.
Because if not, to be honest, what we're doing is replicating, in a sense, the experience that they wouldn't have to leave New York to have.
David would disagree, but
I mean, you know, in the sense that you're not opening up the opportunities.
I agree, it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, no, but and I mean, it's important. Yeah, please.
Yes, it sounds like a wonderful program, but I'm having a hard time thinking about an 18-year-old going off to Costa Rica as a freshman. And
Why, dear?
What kind of, well, I'm wondering about the level of maturity, mostly, and so I'm wondering, how do you select these kids in terms of, what's the profile that they have?
For example, have they all already been exchange students overseas?
Some of them have. No, some of them have had.
Students who go overseas as a junior, they're
Right.
fine.
Some of them have had previous experiences. They also bond fairly quickly, so they're relying on each other as well when they're in the field. And we have excellent field directors in Costa Rica. The associate dean of the program is based there and is responsible for the freshman orientation experience as well. So they require, if you like, an orientation. They require some guidance in terms of how to acclimate themselves. And then they have to settle into actually undertaking the studies.
Special kind of student.
Yeah.
This is not your.
No, it is. No, it is a special. There's no question about that.
I'm just wondering how they're found. How do you find these? How do they
Well,
select them?
again, the admissions office and the dean travels the country.
Travels around and they-
And then the applications come in and they're selected according to the way in which the applications are completed. So they're evaluated on the basis of what is believed to be the requirements to actually participate and to take the most from this type of a program.
What kind of high schools do you draw from mostly? All kinds of public
correct?
No, it's across the board.
Across the
Yeah, no, it's across the board. I don't think that they privilege one type of high school over the other. Yeah.
Do you have any data on students coming from low-income families? Because this is $250,000 for a four-year program. I mean,
Yeah.
I teach high school. I
Right.
don't have very many students that could afford anywhere near that. The spending money, the flights,
Mhm.
you're in Costa Rica, how the kids are gonna wanna go do things like zip lining and stuff that costs like $80. I mean, that's not something for your typical low-income family to be able to ever afford.
But there's also support, I mean, the way programs offer scholarships.
Because most financial aid only supports tuition, it's not gonna support all the extra.
Right, but I mean, there is certain support, and I mean, what I saw at graduation last May was not only graduating students from high-income families. That I would not say, not at all. If anything, it was quite diverse. Now, how they managed to do that, I couldn't go into the ins and outs of that, but what I saw graduating was a very diverse cohort. Diverse in terms of where they're coming from, and diverse in terms of, if you want to call it, background or income.
A lot of your marginalized Americans wouldn't be able to get into the program.
Well, that's a problem, though, generally. I mean, a lot of your marginalized Americans wouldn't be able to get into many programs that they would want to get into. I'm sorry.
How do you measure your results?
Assessment is something that we're constantly focused on. Part of it is where the students wind up after they complete the program. How they're obviously doing in the courses, the skills that they're acquiring. One of the reasons why the dean wanted us to innovate this way is we're beginning to work in this type of learning with the Google suite of tools. So in other words, starting with a learning management system that I can show you very briefly, and then we'll bring it to a close. So for example, the learning management system is called Classroom, quite simply. And on that learning management system, in the stream, you have basically the syllabus. So what you would see as a syllabus on paper is actually created within Classroom online. And there are videos that talk about why the selection of a specific book, as well as key concepts which are presented also in a lecture form through video to complement the reading and to complement my lectures. You then see a place for the students where they actually meet, as well as some of my colleagues, including the dean and the director of writing. And then you have here the ability to go straight to the Google Drive. And on the Google Drive, we have both Classroom itself with everything related to the course, including individual folders for each student where all their information and assignments are housed, slide presentations for every facet of the course as it's being developed. The sessions are always archived. So everything we do on video conference is archived for accountability as well as student review. If there's something that's not clear in a lesson, they have the opportunity to look at it again on audio, video, and there's an integrated chat. So there's accountability to the institution because everything is recorded and archived, and there's sensitivity to the student who might need to listen to a portion or the entire lecture over again.
Do you have any private benefactors to the program, or what does Bill Gates think of it?
That's a question for the dean. That's a question for the dean. I mean, I have no idea in terms of that. That's really his responsibility, and I'm sure he'd be delighted to hear from you about it. But I'm certainly not going to speak for the dean. Yes, please.
I'm not familiar with the UN University in Costa Rica, but I know that in San Jose there are two University of Costa Rica and Universidad Nacional de Costa Rica. So why have the students go on that?
They do both. I think they have an option to do UN University courses that correspond to their interest, and I think they also have the opportunity to do courses at a local university as well. I highlighted the UN University simply because the students that I've been working with, a number of them have enrolled for what is called independent studies, and those independent studies are taught by faculty members at the United Nations University in Costa Rica. However, the local university there, I also believe that they take courses there as well. different students have different options that they undertake. Yeah.
Is there still a connection with the Quakers? Are they still involved in any way?
I think that they are involved to the extent that when we had the 50th anniversary in May, a number were there. So the original vision of the program as an experiential learning program was very much alive in their presence there. Now that LIU Global is part of Long Island University, I think that the Quaker presence is felt more in the legacy and in the ways in which the alumni will be called on to participate as the program continues. But that the spirit of the program is very reflective of what they originally had as a vision. I think that's true in this idea of experiential learning, and I think it's true in the idea of students motivated to reach out and to experience as much as they can of different local cultures, learn languages, and really bring those experiences back with them as they go through the program. Yeah.
I'm very curious. I'm wondering, how many languages do you speak?
Well, that's a question of degree.
You're dealing with these students from all these different countries.
Yeah. I speak French, Italian, German, read Spanish, can read some Hungarian and some Romanian.
Honest to God, all those languages.
Yeah. Well, that's the product of a Scranton education. No, that's the truth. That's the truth. I graduated from here and I was assigned at a bilingual university. And from there, I continued. Absolutely. But the origins of that were imbued by William J. Parente, who was Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences here when I was an undergraduate.
What year was that?
1983 was when he encouraged me to apply for Fulbright. And when you applied for Fulbright with Dr. Parente, believe me, he put you through the loops. The man was a master in terms of teaching. For the Fulbright Experience. I don't think he does that as much anymore, which is why I said was, but in the classroom I agree with you. He still is the master. Absolutely. No question.
I supplied him with the Wall Street Journal.
Please.
How do you handle a student who is fully qualified, loves the program, and says, I also want I want to have a broader education, I want to take a science course, or I want to take a course in mathematics? How do you handle that?
Well, this is something which, again, the dean in the reassessment of the curriculum is trying to integrate different possibilities for students so that the curriculum is reflective of what you would call the basics you would have in a core, and then what you would call the electives that the student would take as a complement. So right now, that's why the international relations minor is being introduced. A minor in social entrepreneurship, I believe, is also being introduced. So in other words, they are changing the way the curriculum is configured. And this is something which I think responds to the question that you just asked, because you are going to have, as different students apply, the need to respond in the instance that there are certain, shall we say, majors or emphases that they want to have. Absolutely. How are we doing on time? I don't want to.
We have 10 more minutes.
Okay.
And maybe would you like to stop the quick Q&A and
Well, no, I mean, I think we're here for me to respond to them. I'm fine. I have no problem with that. Please.
Getting back to Maury's original question, are there any schools who offer this program? Any other schools?
Not in the configuration that LIU Global does, no. No. Yeah.
I don't mean to be rude, but what you
Please.
said about Lynette,
Uh-huh.
it happens to be Linus, we know the Scranton Times.
Is,
I worked here for 50 years, so it's Linus.
you see, this has been ongoing because I was with Bob Zelno, and he told me it was Lynette. So I think there's this ongoing.
I worked there 50 years.
Now,
It's Linus.
he's one line of family. Colette, he's a development. He should know that, right?
You're not rude at all. I stand corrected. The thing is that for my classmates, we always called it Lynette.
Can we call you Colette?
You may.
If Bob retired, his Connie from I suggest that.
Our apologies on behalf of the entire cohort.
I'm in the 50-year club down there, so I know.
But we love the dorm. We love the dorm very much.
So don't forget now, what is it?
Line it. And we have it on film, dear. So now it's captured for posterity. There you go.
It's viral.
It's viral, dear. It's absolutely viral. Good. I think that's good then.
Yeah. Do you want to?
Let me well, let me close. Yeah, let me wind up. Hang on for a minute. Let me close on this point maybe. Just out of curiosity, show of hands, how many of you have taken either an online course or have taught one? Okay, let me ask you, sir. How do you normally teach your online courses?
We have a teaching platform,
Right.
which happens to be Engage for graduate courses and D2L
Okay.
for
And what type of a platform is it?
the standard learning management system. It has opportunities that you can put in whatever content you would want,
Mm-hmm.
do discussions,
Mm-hmm.
do meetings, whether with video or without video,
Mm-hmm.
using Skype or other comparable software.
And how do you find the interactions on a system like this, which is purely asynchronous, non-real time, where they're just contributing to a forum like this, as opposed to when you're in meetings with them that are real video meetings? How do you find the learning? Is there a difference for you?
Well, for the graduate, really, it's not that much difference. In fact, it's richer because these are people who are committed. The groups do group work, so they fall out in terms of what is convenient to them.
Right.
When they schedule group meetings, and then they would ask me, even if it's way out of my time zone, they would ask me sometimes to see if I would like to join in. So it's possible. With undergraduates, it's more difficult to get them real time. The only undergraduate experience where I can sort of wield the club has been part of, I've taught the course as part of the Jesuit Commons.
Mm-hmm.
So we were dealing with refugee populations
Mm-hmm.
in various locations.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was very little opportunity to do real time.
And what's the average size, would you say, of the classes that you're teaching non-real time?
Non-real time?
Yeah.
Well, which is most of it. And that our university has put a limit on the number of people that can be involved. So 18 is the number.
Okay.
It can go up to 21,
Right.
depending on discretion, but beyond 21, no. So
Right.
that's how much we handle.
That's the concern, and I think that's the point that I would end off on. My experience is that, especially if you're working with real time, you need small cohorts to provide the type of attention for each student. In my case, it's even more important because these students are spread out around the globe. So providing individualized attention with them and following up on the learning is very important. The type of learning that you see here where they post to forums, through the years, the assessment that I've gotten from students, and this is really across. So I teach in real time talented high school students, undergraduates, graduates, and now we're doing professional learning as well. So it's really across the range. And by far, those who have the opportunity to learn in real time will tell me that those experiences stay with them more, especially because they become more like mentoring experiences. Individualized, custom-made mentoring experiences. That's the type of engagement that I like when I think about working with these tools, because when I think of citizenship learning and the dialogue that's really needed, I think much more of a real-time dialogue, where there's a lot of contestation, a lot of, shall we say, back and forth, a lot of talking about the challenges that you brought up before. So in other words, if I have a person who's in a local environment where there are a lot of challenges, we want to hear about it, and we want to be able to work through it. When you have this type of learning, I think it serves a purpose, right? But it would not be my preferred way. because the contestation and the ability to really engage and to make the experience truly student-centered, when you have students all around the globe, that I think you achieve when you have this type of space that I'm talking about, where it's real time, where you have a plurality in the dialogue emerging, and where you have the ability to really encourage students to share more and more of what they're engaged in as you teach a course. This, I think, is limited in terms of what you can do with that. Now, I'm curious, what do you teach?
I teach business, marketing.
Okay.
But real time would be very difficult. It's not a technology issue. I mean, you have a center in Hangzhou.
Well, I solved that by doing 2 sessions on the day. So the ones who are in Asia, I'm teaching at 7 a.m. and the others in different parts of the globe, I'm teaching at 11 a.m. So I split it up.
But then the interaction with you is real time, but the interaction between, which is the purpose of this whole thing.
They have 5 and 5 split, or now 4 and 5 split. We address it in part by archiving. We address it in part by encouraging them also to be in touch with each other as they think about the course as a whole. And the bonds are fairly strong among them already. So what they're explaining to me is that they're curious to think about how what they're learning in the course relates to their thinking about challenges in the world. And because they're in touch with each other from their different sites, they're actually talking about these challenges in the context of what they're learning in the course. So they might not be with me, but they're with each other. And I can see that, I can see it in the journal entries and how they're writing back and forth to each other about a lecture that we've talked about. So I think you're right. It's not always seen in the real time because I have to divide the sessions, but it is seen among them as a cohort. And my interest is that they're not only talking about it when they're with me, more importantly, they continue to talk about it. They continue to argue with each other real time using the video, even when I'm not with them. I want it to be, in other words, a 24/7 experience where, like when I was at the Fletcher School, we were a small group. We were 120 graduate students. It was a small community. What united us was our passion to study international relations. You had people there who were physicists. I mean, they came from all different backgrounds. We were in a small building on Tufts campus. We didn't really visit Tufts. We were at Fletcher. But all we did, we had a passion to talk IR 24/7. And every morning, from 10 to 10:30, there were no classes. Students, faculty, administrators all went to Pound Dining Hall to have a coffee, and all we did for that half hour was talk about current events. It was the greatest sense of community I ever experienced. And if I could reproduce something like that in terms of the curiosity for the students using these types of tools, I would be a very happy professor. But that's the experience that I mean when I say to you, you're living it, you're in it, and your passion for it is strong, is vibrant. That's the kind of learning I think we need when we think of the challenges we face. That's, for me, citizenship learning. And I think these spaces need to be created to foster that type of learning. It's optimistic, yes, but I also think it's realistic. So I'm a realistic optimist. And on that point, I'll close.
That we're not opposed to realistic optimism, so any kind of optimism that is based on some realities and can still be optimism is worthwhile. And Colette, your presentation, as you can see, attracted a lot of questions, and I think most of us like to have a lot of questions. So thank you for answering. Yeah. So we'll have a short break, and at 3:15 we're going to hear about another reality of our time, responses to terrorism, which is also a global phenomenon, unfortunately. So have something outside, a little respite.